Well, good evening to you, Professor Jen here. Happy winter evening. Wonderful to be here with you. Thanking Captioning Services for everything that you're going to do for us. I really do appreciate all these wonderful services, bridging all these worlds so we have our closed captioned so everybody can enjoy Lecturecast, podcast, coffee table conversations, etc. So this evening, I have for us my little please do not disturb sign, you know, a private sign, a sign that says, several things in the industry of hotels, motels, Holiday Inns, or at home, the idea, privacy, or as our British friends say, privacy, to have privacy. Why do we need all this privacy, right? To have discussions, to have dialogue about literature, pop culture, how it is that we reflect often on what we have read either as children, young adults, we are now with our reading as adults, analyzing messages, understanding culture and context, all the good stuff, right? So please do not disturb. What does that mean? I think about not only our little fairy tales, Snow White, the whole idea that we have to make her pretty, presentable, we have to really fix her up. Uh, she has to be beautified, she has to be finessed, and she has to be so attractive. This seems to be very important in Snow White. And so we say to ourselves, why? Why do we continue to tell these stories? Why does it seem to be so important? I think often about the 1980s. 1980s was such a strange place, especially in media, television, in the arts. It was a strange place in fashion. It was a strange place in music. We had singers like David Bowie. Some of you might recognize that artist name, David Bowie. And he too uh, was very well received, but also very pretty. And I say it kindly, really very pretty, very attractive. A man identified as a man. Oh, today, I would say probably also identified as non-binary at times, gender neutral, gender fluid, very attractive, wore lots of makeup in a time and place where certainly in the 1970s, 1980s, people that identified as male usually didn't challenge these conventional ideas about makeup, cosmetics. I remember in department stores in the 1970s, 1980s, the closest we got to male cosmetics was really the cologne counter. And I remember it pretty well. They had, the aftershave, they had the cologne, they had the soap on a rope. We had, of course, something that seemed like body wash, but it really wasn't called body wash, probably shower wash. The phrase body wash was more of a 1980s, 90s kind of thing. And it really sort of stopped there. There was no sudden tanners for men. There was no mascara for men, no eye highlighter, skin tinting products for men. It just didn't exist. Maybe if it did exist, it existed really not street level. Certainly, it existed for persons in theater, persons in performance, but not in everyday wear. Here today, we have all kinds of products that are gender neutral, products designed specifically for men, by men, products that are marketed to inform men. We have more and more products today that are marketed for persons of all ages, a variety of gender, persons perhaps that are either identifying as male or female or both or fluid. And so we have cosmetics for all these things because we have strong messages out there, you see, strong messages that we need to be attractive. We need to have sexuality. We need to hang on and maintain attractiveness. So many persons when they're older, and when I mean older, I mean, it starts somewhere around the 40s. I say the 40s because women go through menopause, perimenopause, peri meaning before menopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. So around somewhere in the 40s, men go through changes also in testosterone, hormonal structure often. This is when men talk about, inability to perform, maybe some difficulties in anatomy and physiology. I think you know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be very polite and very proper this evening. I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I became so proper today, right? You know what I'm talking about. And so we have the influence of all these rejuvenating creams, warming lotions, fluids. You talk to P. Diddy, he's busy with all his baby oil. We have all kinds of pills for men to take, Viagra, etc. We have pills for women to take. We have hormone therapy replacement, etc. So we seem to be very concerned about all this in our cultural context, not only nationally as well as internationally. This is an international thing. People want to maintain their sexuality, they want to maintain their attractiveness. Certainly, as people age, the aged, right? We talk about people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? People that are living well into their 90s. Also, they're not looking to give up. They're not looking to surrender, say goodbye to youth so easily. People are having hip replacements. People are doing all kinds of things to extend their quality of life, their quality of movement, range of motion, their ability to travel, their ability to go back to school, audit classes to keep their mind sharp. And really, why? Not only to feel good, self-awareness, etc., but really to maintain and to continue being attractive. Because as we find getting older, see, you're not there yet, but when we find that we're getting older, sometimes sexuality and attractiveness is not only the physical sense of being youthful and wanted, it also has to do with intelligence and attractiveness and sexuality, etc. People that are very attractive, pleasing. It's sometimes because they know quite a few things about a subject that can be very attractive. They know how to navigate, they know how to maneuver, they have life experience, and that sometimes takes the place. Hard to believe when we're all young, right? Takes the place of that craving to find somebody else, to be with somebody else, to find a suitor, to find a sexual partner, etc. I think often about Tennessee Williams. I bring him up a lot because he really opened the door for so much discussion, especially in his play Glass Menagerie. I might have referenced it before with regard to another one of my uh, conversations with you. But in his character, Laura, and mind you, Laura has a myriad of issues. The more I think about Laura in his play, Glass Menagerie, she's being, fixed up by her mother because her mother would really like to sexualize her for the purpose of finding a suitor. Okay? Sort of very Snow White, make her pretty, turn her into something maybe she isn't. And there's a lot of work that goes into Laura because in order for Laura to snag a man, right? She has to have been fixed up. She has to have been manicured and presentable. And really, when we look at Laura, as we look at so many other characters, nobody could come out at the time and really discuss her handicap. And it was difficult, especially 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, for a character like Laura, who Tennessee Williams tells us in the play that she had recovered from polio. Maybe we might look at a character like Laura today. We would definitely say neurodivergent. We would definitely say neurospicy. We would definitely say in many circles, and I say this from what goes on in my house, I have a son that is neurodivergent and has many wonderful gifts, at the same time has some struggles. And we look at autism, we look at autistic traits, we look at sometimes inadequate socialization, these different characteristics that many persons that have autism and autism diagnosis, etc., manage. But see, for Laura, not only the polio and her apparent limp in the play that Tennessee delivers for us to us, which makes her very self-conscious because that's a time and place where persons that weren't, quote, perfect might have been looked over very easily. Maybe they were hidden and cloaked behind closed doors, right up there with my little sign, please do not disturb, you see? And today, in pop culture, we celebrate all kinds of things. In television, I noticed there are people that are clearly overweight. And it has nothing to do with attractiveness. I mean overweight in the sense that probably for health reasons, perhaps they could lose some weight. But we see the whole person. In other words, we're not hiding. In the 1980s, especially television, mass media, everybody had to be beautiful. It was so peculiar. We had shows like The Love Boat. That show was really about finding love in a half hour to an hour with commercials. It usually aired Friday nights. Sometimes it aired Saturday nights. And they would bring on people that it had like, a sudden story, a quick fictional piece, flash fiction that would say, the person he was either broken up with or recovered from surgery. There was some kind of a trauma. Let's use that word. And then in the show Love Boat, they'd meet the love of their life. There would be a romance. There would be some kind of reckoning. And it ended happily ever after. It was a weekly show, did very, very well. Everybody was always beautiful on the show. It was very rare that we saw somebody overweight. It was very rare that we saw somebody neurodivergent. It was very rare that we saw somebody that was working alongside of their own health issues, whether today we would say diabetes, we would say vision issues, etc. We never really saw that. So I think we've come really a long way in pop culture today, 2025, that when we look at television, we see people that look like us. I see people that look like me. They look like they're, pre-senior citizen. They look aged. They look maybe tired. They look uh, far from perfect in a bathing suit, myself included. They look like maybe they could have worked out for 10, 20 years, but they opted not to because they felt that being intellectual and having been learned and well-read was a workout in a sense. So we see more and more persons that are recognizable. Maybe this is why we continue to tell the story. So we bring characters that seem to be gentle and recognizable to us. You know, in many shows in the 1970s, 80s, I really can't think of any, even in the 1990s, where we would have perhaps in a weekly show, in a drama series, etc., women that talked about mastectomy and or that lived with mastectomy through their role as a character on a show. Today, there are plenty, absolute plenty, shows, films, etc., where people talk about their mastectomy through their fictional character. Sometimes we even see demonstration of persons using different apparatus to fill in the breast area. We have dialogue in shows on television as well as, streaming services for films that are definitely PG-R, etc., that talk about different kinds of surgery that people have had. We've really come such a long way in opening the door that perhaps before, please do not disturb meant a lot of things. It meant we couldn't address sexuality. We couldn't address the reality of body. I think often today, versus 1970s, 80s, we never heard the dad bod. We never heard of this. We had shows like The $1 Million Man. The Million Dollar Man, Superman, Batman, all these masculine superheroes, always buff, always, ripped, always in the best shape possible, always very attractive, certainly not attractive, not attractive, you know what I'm saying? Unattractive. And so we had all these messages that in order to be on television, there was another show, Dallas. This was a big one. And everybody on this show was handsome and just, a powerhouse in cultural context, so good looking. In 1970s, 80s, we had actors, Burt Reynolds, we had Robert Redford, we had all of the Paul Newman, we had all these very handsome men. And then as time continued to go by for us, we had different looking men. We had men that appeared sluggish. We had people like the late John Candy in many films. He was tremendously overweight, tremendous talent, very attractive. Humor is very attractive. We learned that attractiveness could mean so many things other than being perfect, the idea of perfection. And so it's changed greatly for us, how we look at the model of attractiveness, how it just seems so important to us. Up until really the 1990s, I'd say, is when the page got turned in telling this story, when we started to say attractiveness means so many things to so many people. And it also has intrinsic value. In the 2000s, I noticed the attractiveness of self, giving self in fictional characters, in entertainment, the idea that people would do something heroic. What was that series? Die Hard, you know, uh, the idea of saving somebody, saving people. He didn't have to be handsome, Bruce Willis. He didn't have to be a lot of things, but he had to be very brave. The idea of being brave was really, I'd say, an awareness of attractiveness. Here we are today. We see so many different characters on television and different forms of media, extremely attractive. People that take up causes, extremely attractive. People that defend other people through the characters that they play on television and shows, extremely attractive. Really sends us the message, I think about it often, that sometimes we say, just like in the animal kingdom, we look at somebody like animals, they say often in biological sciences, they say that animals that stare at each other for more than 3 seconds, it's either because they're going to kill each other or make love, right? And so they have this either attractiveness that they feel or they feel fierce towards one another, and here we are today in a variety of media where I think that we've come to the new dawn where we say, oh, you get to know this person, even through fictional character, you say, maybe I didn't find them appealing or attractive before, but they have so many wonderful characteristics and so many wonderful parts of themselves that they offer that, boy, I find this person very attractive. It's just such an interesting lesson to learn that everything is not what we think it is with relation to attractiveness. I think often too, especially with computers, here's what I'm thinking. People say, well, I saw his picture, I saw her picture, I saw their picture, I don't find them attractive. Then you start to speak with somebody online and you say, wow, I really have to give this a second look, this person a second consideration, because maybe we're not all meant to be in a catalog of sorts where we just decide within this 3 seconds whether we find somebody attractive or not. How important really knowing the inside of somebody becomes, not just the outside, with these scenarios like we see in Cinderella, right? All fixed up for the ball. Snow White laying there looking so defined, looking so refined, looking so beautiful, so effervescent. You know, we think of Pinocchio, tells all these terrible little fibs, and his nose grows, that we get to know him by his nose growing. How do we see Laura? How do we get to know Laura? Tennessee Williams is trying to get us to know Laura, other than a person with, I don't like this word, but Tennessee uses it in the play, references her handicap, her defect. It bothers me terribly. But it was the word of the time. It was a word that our culture used, how we saw people, how we define people. And of course, we know otherwise today that, what we would have called imperfection sometimes miraculously is somebody's perfection. Isn't that something? That their imperfection, what we would have said, becomes their perfection. It's so them, you know? It's uh it's something that identifies somebody, but yet so beautifully, you know, and how we have to look deeper than what somebody can't do, rather looking deeper and saying, look at all the things that somebody can do, somebody can achieve without focusing on sexuality, without focusing on attractiveness, without focusing on being perfect. I mean, really, when you think about it, nobody's perfect. We get all of these messages, this TikTok, right? It's really so hard on the young person, the TikTok, the Instagram, these reels, because we're not really seeing anything for what it is. We're seeing 30 seconds of like a flash of a moment where the person might have done their hair all day long. They might have picked these outfits out all day long. They might have worked out for weeks, if not months, just so we see 30 seconds of somebody's beauty in front of us, but it's not even realistic. It's not the real thing. You know, I look at these young kids that are in grade school that are just absolutely glued to these phones. And mind you, I love the phones. I do. I get doctor's appointments on the phones. I get reminders on the phones. I have calendar on the phone. I can get the weather. So the phone has been very good to me. But at the same time, I think to myself, all these young people that are in grade school, junior high, that get these flash moments where they think that sexuality and attractiveness is really what they see in these 30-second blurbs. It just isn't. It's just not realistic. These suggestions, if we drink this protein powder, that we're going to have six-pack abs. Now, that might be the case when somebody's in their teens, their 20s, their 30s. It's just not always achievable and possible, especially after women have had children. Maybe men have gained a few pounds and they're having children. They're sitting on the couch doing real things, reading a story, playing with their children. They're not in the gym every minute. Maybe they don't have these six-pack, four-pack, two-pack, they're just real people that are very attractive, that are doing things with their family, that are doing things for their community, not not sort of feeding into these false stereotypes of what people are expected to look like. It's just not realistic. We see people today, you watch the Grammys, etc. You see people that are older in their 50s, 60s, and we say, oh my goodness, oh my God, they don't have any makeup on. Oh, they haven't aged well. Well, you know what? Aging isn't for sissies. You, when we age, I always say, and I say it, kindly of myself, thank God none of us look like what we've been through, because we're weathered, we have disappointments, we have weight we gained, weight we lost. Sometimes, like for myself, I look at myself. At one time I had gained a little bit of weight, no big deal. And then of course the check engine light went on, and the doctor said you really need to lose this weight, and your health, will definitely prolong, and you'll continue to be very vital, very vibrant, which is how I'd like to be. I like to live like that without going to the doctor every minute. And so I took off all this weight, and I do notice one little thing as it relates to pop culture. I notice I do look tired because I had some weight and then I lost a lot of weight. So I do look tired. But see, I appreciate it. I'm not so hard on myself. I don't say, oh, well, culture tells us that the cultural context is not to look tired, that I should be running to the doctor to get fillers, Botox, and everything else. I refuse to do it because first of all, it's not me. In the fairy tale world of beauty, it's still not me. I look at my physicality today and I say to myself, well, maybe I look tired because it's indicative of, quite a bit of unnecessary weight that I lost. Skin does not go back the way it started. That's a reality for all of us. And I'm fine with it, and I feel good about it. And I defend it. I defend it. Uh, in the world of fairy tale, maybe we're also sold from a very young age into early adulthood, midlife, as we become older, elderly, etc., aged. We're sold this idea that, forever young, we're forever beautiful. And we are those things. It's just that we have to come to terms that there are just natural effects of living, natural effects of health, diet, how we see ourselves, how we comport ourselves. I'll close with this thought because this is really what I'm thinking at this moment, to have authentic conversation with you. It used to be we would say, oh, grandma's underpants. We would say, grandpa has the sneakers with the black socks on. You know what I'm talking about. We would say, oh, granny panties. We had all these sayings. But you see, this was molded to us through culture. This was molded to us through literature, through the arts, through entertainment, that we had this notion of what it is that we were supposed to look like, what all of us were supposed to be wearing. Very similar to Cinderella with her ball gown, very similar to Snow White being coiffed, looking beautiful, looking perfect. We had all these messages, and today, you see different ads, J.C. Penney's, you see Old Navy, you see people my age and even older in Old Navy ads, because what we're saying is that maybe how we feel on the inside is what dictates how we look on the outside. That no longer are we shopping in stores where you are sort of separated by age. Today you can go to Old Navy here in Rochester, in Henrietta. You can go to J.C. Penney's here in Henrietta. You can go to Walmart. We don't have a lot of shopping if you haven't noticed. You can go to TJ Maxx, Marshalls, look around. You see people that are in grade school shopping alongside people in high school, shopping alongside people who might have had, the beginnings of their young family in their 20s and 30s, shopping alongside people midlife, 40s, shopping along people like myself in their 60s, and we're all in the same racks. And that's something, that we're all on the same racks. No longer are we sectioned off in different departments. We're all trying to live our best lives. So maybe the idea of the fairy tale that forever young and forever beautiful and forever handsome, all of these characteristics, we are those things. It's just that we came to terms in contemporary culture that we change and we evolve. And that evolution and acceptance of that evolution, the truth about things, the truth about what happens to us physically, is the fairy tale. That is how it ends happily ever after. You see what I'm saying to you? Maybe that is the message today. Maybe we had to make adaptations. What would Tennessee Williams have told us today about Laura? Would he have used the word neurodivergent? Would he have said uh, autism? Would he have said, uh, different physical conditions? Would he have said recovered from childhood trauma? Would he have used the word trauma? Back in my day, we really didn't use that word. Today, we use trauma even when discussing illness, let's say due to COVID-19. People say, well, it's, an offshoot of trauma that was caused by an illness. Even our language has changed in our schematic of happily ever after. So I leave you with these final thoughts, my dears, and I wish you well. I hope you enjoy our little coffee table series. I like to bring you different aspects of what's going on in the world, and the evolution of it, especially from this period of really 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s to where we are today. So you have some sense of really how far we've evolved. Anyhow, I wish you a wonderful night and that you have happiness every day when you step out the door. Good night to you.